Doesn't mean they're from outer space, but they're not identified, and they're flying, and they're objects. Investigators found multiple aircraft encounters they could not explain, and they've even been storing metal alloy recovered from the vicinity of these encounters.
So being a little bit of a rebel, as I was at school, I was one of the first to run through and jump over the fence and arrive at the Grange, and it was on the ground in front of me. The other two girls had arrived before me, and one was hysterical, Tanya, and the other girl had fainted. So I just looked at it, and after a few minutes it just raised up above me, probably to about 12 feet, turned on its side and went straight up into the air and disappeared almost instantly.
Of course, UFO does not mean alien, and this distinction matters because many people do misunderstand the term.
More than 80 million Americans believe in aliens.
No, more than 80 million Americans see that there are objects maneuvering in our skies that are unidentified. Although many do associate that with, quote, aliens, but also the likelihood of another life somewhere in the universe, or, quote, aliens, does not necessarily require belief. It's statistically improbable that we're the only species in the universe that can think about the fact that we're thinking. That said, there are some who use this distinction as a tool to dismiss the topic entirely.
Well, so people, I think, have conflated the concept of a UFO with whether we're visited by aliens. UFO means unidentified, flying, object, okay? This is a highly non-specific term.
But you know what we're looking at. You stare at the cosmos for a living.
I'm not authorized to go beyond this part.
Wow, you're in!
Although it's true that many who operate this stuff too eagerly do assume non-terrestrial explanations. Others are just curious because of the evidence at hand and our inability to explain it. And the story you're about to hear falls precisely into that category, which is a true story of mystery and derangement. You will hear it all from their perspective. You will hear their testimonies from their own mouths, where it all started at 11 a.m. on April the 6th, 1966.
And I just happened to be looking out the window, thinking how to fudge my science report. What I saw directly south was something that I'd never seen before.
The kids were just wrapping up their sports on the cricket oval at Westall High in Melbourne, Australia. Among them was 13-year-old Jackie Argent and her friend Tanya, when suddenly an object about the size of 2 or 3 cars was seen hovering over the school by more than 200 observers, most of whom children between the ages of 12 and 13, but also observed by a handful of teachers.
So it was a round silver disc, and it seemed to be very low over the school, and I remember kids screaming and running inside.
We watched the way it moved, which was amazing. It was capable of standing still and moving very, very fast.
The student came in, was hysterical, leaned up against a sliding door, screaming, "There's a flying saucer in the oval." And of course everybody started to head towards the door, and the teacher said, "Sit down, it's not recess yet," and a few minutes later the bell went off.
Everyone started moving, like a whole lot of zebras being terrified by crocodiles.
Though the children were panicked, most were also curious, with the majority of them running toward the craft together. Barbara Robbins, who was the chemistry teacher at the time, grabbed her camera and started taking pictures. The craft descends into the forest known as the Grange. Jackie and her friend Tanya watch. They decide to pursue the craft and leave the school grounds by hopping the fence. Tanya goes first.
Tanya and I and this other girl, we were over the fence. Tanya was in the lead, and we ran towards where it was coming down. I lost sight of Tanya. She was in front of me.
Tanya, now split from her friend Jackie and alone, finds the object on the ground. It was motionless, leaving an imprint on the grass where it rested. And other than the student Victor Zakruzny and a few watching him behind the fence, Tanya was the only child to be this close to the object. Multiple planes are flying above. The craft rises, taking off in a maneuver that has been described the same way by all observers.
We looked up and we just saw this saucer type thing taking off, and it seemed to turn side on and just disappear into thin air.
I see Andrew Greenwood, the science teacher, coming towards me, and he said, "Did you see it? Did you see it?" And he pointed up in the air, and I said, "No, see what?" I have a very, very clear picture of him, and I remember almost exactly what he said. And he said it was up in the sky, it moved at incredible speeds, it hovered, it seemed to go away, and there seemed to be light planes. He thought they were actually checking it out from the Melbourne airport, and they were circling around it.
Sort of stopped dead, and then it just sort of started descending straight down. And I'd say it got down about halfway up that gum tree or above the goalpost and sat there for a while, and then it just sort of lifted straight up and then just took straight off.
This thing went down behind the trees, then it came up. It was like it had become aware of these planes coming in, and it just went woof and just left them like they were standing still. Like a lot of other people, I just shut up about it. You know, you were a kid, you were making it up. So you just be quiet, and in your mind you just think, I know what I saw, and no one's ever going to shake me from that. I know what I saw.
Can I ask what happened to the girl? You took her back to the school, the one that was hysterical. Is it Tanya?
Tanya comes out of the woods screaming to Jackie for help. They're split up, with Jackie being put back inside the school and Tanya in an ambulance.
There was an ambulance on the oval, and she'd been taken away in the ambulance.
Jackie went to Tanya's house to check on her, surprised, however, to see that the woman who answered the door had an English accent and was not Tanya's mom.
I went to her house the following day, and an English-speaking woman opened the door and said there had never been a Tanya living there. Now, the problem with that is that Tanya's parents didn't speak English to start with. They were Yugoslavian. So I'd been to this house a lot of times and then was told, no, sorry, you're mistaken. Tanya actually reached the craft. I didn't. She came back screaming towards me, and then I ran back with her to the school. She got taken away in an ambulance, and that was the last time I saw her.
Do you know if she disappeared? Have you had any contact with her? Do you know where she is and what happened?
I have had no personal contact with her. I know one of the researchers has. She told the researcher that she had no recall of what had happened, that she had no recall of what had happened, she had no recall of what had happened, she had no recall of what had happened, she had no recall.
She was just gone, and she never came back to school.
Shortly after the event, the police and military officials arrived, some speaking with American accents. A class assembly was held where the principal was telling the children that nothing had happened and not to talk about it.
I was prepped to tell the students that what they'd seen didn't exist.
I was near the gate and the police had arrived.
There were journalists outside. The police are being called in to keep the journalists away.
We were told that we weren't allowed to speak to the media.
A confrontation occurred between Barbara Robbins, who was the chemistry teacher who took the pictures, the principal, and a military official who instructed her to give up not just the film, but the entire camera. After the kids were permitted to leave, some did interviews with the media, until they were told not to.
And I'd actually been giving an interview to Channel 9, and the policeman actually walked up to them and said, stop filming and you go back into the school ground. Okay, so that's what I did. I was 12 and a half years old.
Because I was a mischievous sort of person, I was always getting into trouble. I had detention for actually appearing on the show, and then I got detention again at a later date after my picture and story was in the Dandenong Journal.
Although the interviews were aired on Channel 9, no one has ever been able to attain the recorded footage because Channel 9 no longer has it and cannot account for why the film reel has gone missing. But the children and teachers were not the only people who witnessed the event. Those whose homes surrounded the Grange also saw the object, including Paul Smith, who, along with the craft, noticed something else even the school hadn't seen.
I just thought, oh, somebody's got some way of projecting a film of something into the sky. I didn't believe that it was really happening. After a while, trucks turned up with, it looked like army trucks. There would have been about 20 guys got out.
Another witness of these army trucks was Les Madu, an apprentice mechanic. Him and his co-worker crouched behind some trees to get a better look, having to duck out of sight of the farmer, who Les claims was lapping the farm to keep watch.
We can only look every so often as this tractor came around. He was on guard duty. This was a farmer who has decided to help out.
2 army trucks, 2 men in camouflage, and 2 in blue uniforms were in the farm. One was wielding what looked like a metal detector, sweeping the small same area of the farm. In the next moment, they turned and started kicking the grass over and over.
They started kicking violently at the ground. The 2 officers decide then, time to come back.
Paul waits, then walks up to the spot the men were at and sees the same imprint Terry Peck was describing.
And it did land because when we got there, there was a great big round patch of like flattened sort of yellow, and the grass was all flattened in a swirly sort of a pattern.
And the same one that's in this photograph, which was not taken at Westall High, but 4 months earlier by farmer George Pedley in Tully, Australia. According to declassified files from the National Archives of Australia, the farmer listed the same characteristics as the objects seen at Westall High. The most interesting characteristic was, quote, after ascending, the object proceeded to tilt to its side, then accelerate at a fantastic speed southwest.
Turned on its side.
And it just went woof and just left them like they were standing still.
The object was described as making no loud noises other than a faint buzzing Pedley mistook for his tractor.
And it was making a low buzzing sound.
And 4 days earlier, this photograph was taken at the Grange at Westall High.
Turned on its side and went zoom straight up into the air and disappeared almost instantly.
And went zoom straight up the air and disappeared almost instantly.
Many other sightings occurred around the same time. Just 2 days before Westall, Ron Sullivan was driving his car when he noticed an incredibly bright light in the forest to his right. The object was pulling Ron's car toward itself. Ron claimed his lights were bending and becoming stretched as if they were magnetized.
The top and the headlights of the car was the biggest awesome thing I've ever seen. They just pulled to the right, as if they were magnetised. I could see all the trees on the right-hand side of the road lighting up, and I said, get out of this one, and I pulled on the left. So I could feel the back left wheel spinning, and I got out of that.
2 days before that, a young man crashed his car in the same place, running into the same tree.
A couple of people from government departments came and visited me. I know one was from the Air Force. They looked at the car, just walked around. I said, well, let's know what you find out. And they said, yeah, we will, Mr. Sullivan. Never heard any more about it.
Kevin Hurley, another man who saw the imprints the day of the event, went to the Grange to check again, only to find the military there, not allowing anyone inside.
There was the Air Force of the Army, a whole group of them there, stopping us from going through into the paddock. Don't come near this in this area. And we just headed off back home. And they had some sort of instrument which at the time I thought looked like Geiger counters. The strong memory I've got is what happened after that. And about a week later, I decided to go back again to have another look. As soon as we got down to where the paddock started, all the grass had been cut, which was quite disturbing.
Wow.
So then we walked through that area to where the circles were, and when we got into the area where the circles were previously, the whole area had been burnt.
And how soon after you saw the flying saucers did the Army and or possibly Air Force personnel show up? How quickly did they get there?
I reckon probably 25, 30 minutes.
I think it was only 20 minutes, which is not a long time.
To have responded, that's one of the... That really, to my way of thinking, that's the key. It's the fact that we respond, whoever it was, the authorities, responded so rapidly.
How did the military respond so fast? And why were many of them wearing camos, clothing the Australian military was not wearing in the mid-60s?
Australians were not using camouflage uniforms in those days, in the mid-60s. Nor would they have been British. But the description of the uniforms certainly matches those worn by the United States Air Force in the mid-1960s.
There were American troops stationed in Australia in 1966 as part of the Vietnam War effort and the current boom of the Cold War, leading some to claim that the American military might have been stationing an advanced technology and that the multiple sightings of crafts in the sky are our own inventions. Even many of the witnesses conceded this, Jackie Argent being one of them.
Initially, I would have said it was some sort of test aircraft. I fell in line with that theory, but there's never been an aircraft, to my knowledge today, that can do what that did.
Unacknowledged special access programs possibly could be hiding something like this. Combine that with the response time of the military directly after this event, and you have yourself a convincing explanation. But that explanation could open the door to another question, which is, where did they get it from? Could humans build something that moves in ways we cannot understand? Or is it more likely that if this tech does exist, it's been attained and not built? But that's as far as I'll go with that. I certainly cannot claim to know the answer. Some skeptics, however, think they know exactly what the object was at Westall High.
Researcher Keith Basterfield believes a rogue balloon is the explanation for the Westall UFO.
I'll let you make up your mind on that. And this is what's so fascinating about the Westall incident, which is that other than a few diehards, most skeptics actually concede that they do not know what it was. Even Skeptoid.com, who releases all their attempts to debunk every UFO ever recorded, admits that this case is a difficult one to solve after they scrambled around aimlessly in the article, forcing their theories by arrogantly patronizing and dismissing all eyewitness accounts. They were still forced to admit that, quote, the Westall 66 UFO remains one of the many question marks in the books, end quote. They then fell on the distinction that, quote, I don't know does not mean it was extraterrestrial. Well, then we agree, because I can honestly say that I do not know either, and I prefer it that way, because not knowing is the point. It doesn't mean I never want to find out the truth of these incidents. It simply means that I do not have an answer, and that I'm open to entertaining certain possibilities that will best and most accurately match the claims made by the witnesses, who I believe, and that some of those possibilities could be extraordinary.
It was amazing, and something that, I've never forgotten. But you just sort of had it stored in the back of your mind, because a lot of people are sceptical.
The fact that they can travel so fast and that they've been spotted all over the world.
It still would take me to my grave. What the hell was that?
She told the researcher that she had no recall of what had happened. And then there was a very odd story about her parents putting her in a convent for some reason that was, to me, totally ridiculous.